Hi, this is Richard Blade, and you're listening to the Blue Zone Podcast Network as it presents Permanent Record, an in-depth look at the classic albums of the 70s and 80s, albums which have earned a permanent place of honor, both in our hearts and in our record collections.
Never Tasted.
Huh?
Well, I mean, on the album that we're going to talk about today, Sarah,
Yeah.
Andy Bell just starts a song by saying, "Never tasted," which seems to have very little to do with the lyrics or anything to do with the song, but it just works so perfectly. So I thought to myself, I'll just start the podcast by saying, "Never tasted."
All right. Well, that was a clever idea. Hey, if it worked for Andy Bell and Vince Clarke, why can't it work for us,
Oh,
right?
yeah. If you're going to steal from the best.
Yeah, for sure.
So, hey, everybody. It's the Permanent Record Podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are here today with a brand new episode. I don't know what episode number this is.
I
lost track.
I think it's in the 170s somewhere.
Wow, that's crazy.
I know.
So we are going to talk about a band that I think most people who listen to the podcast really, really dig, and that's Erasure.
Yes.
Here in America, we say Erasure.
Yeah, we don't say Erasure. I don't even know how they say it.
Erasure?
Erasure? I think it's Erasure.
So hopefully that won't grate on your nerves if you're listening to this somewhere other than the United States. But we're excited to be talking about Vince and Andy because we love them. And of course, we also love our special guest on this episode.
Oh, yes. I am so excited that once again we have with us the fantastic and wonderful Andrew Dineley.
Andrew is one of the greats. He is our musical guru.
Yeah.
Because we started doing this podcast and thought we knew everything. Turns out Andrew knows more than we do, so he's a great person to have join us. He's, of course, the voice behind the Art on Your Sleeve podcast.
Absolutely.
And I think there are going to be a few new episodes coming soon. I don't know if there's going to be any this year. I think he'll get one out this year.
Yeah, we'll see. But, he also writes for Classic Pop Magazine. He is so well-versed with design work and artwork, and so we're going to get into that in this episode. It's always a delight to have him on anytime he can share his knowledge and wisdom with us.
And, of course, you can find all of his design work on softoctopus.co.uk if you want to take a look at the things that he's created over his career as a graphic designer.
Yes, indeed. Please do that.
So we are always happy to have Andrew join us, which is, of course, why I am very upset to admit to you all that I majorly messed up this file. I'm going to take the heat for it, Sarah, because that's what a team leader does.
Okay.
They take the blame
Yeah.
when the inexplicable happens.
Okay. Yeah,
But
this is... yeah.
We cannot figure out what happened, folks.
No.
Okay, in the past, I've come on here before and I've said to you things like, well, I didn't hit record until 4 minutes into the interview.
Yeah.
So the beginning of this interview is going to be from the Zoom recording, and then, it fixes itself.
Right.
When I logged in to talk to Andrew, I hit record when I was the only person on the call.
Yes.
And it was recording. We have a recording of the first 2 minutes and 17 seconds of our conversation.
Oh, wonderful.
Where I hear Andrew join, and we're saying hello and giving friendly greetings.
Yes.
And then the recording just stops. And I have no idea why, because we still have more than half of our storage available on this machine. So there's no reason why it should have cut off.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the recording was not there. So apologies, Andrew. You talked to us for over 3 hours.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to resort to the Zoom recording for this episode and, unfortunately, the next episode, because this episode and the next are all from the same recording session.
Yes, that's right.
So I was so upset. To this day, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, when you talked it over with me, the buttons you pushed, the timing of everything, I am still at a loss for what happened. It doesn't make any sense that you got the results that you did, given what you did.
So this episode, please bear with us on the audio quality. It's a Zoom recording. I've done some tricks here on the computer to try to make it sound a little better than it did originally, and I think it did improve it. Hopefully you'll be so happy to hear some good discussion on Erasure and maybe learn some things that you didn't know about Vince and Andy, and that will make up for the fact that it doesn't sound awesome.
Yeah, the quality of the actual file may not be as high, but I think the quality of the information and the fun level of the discussion is way up there.
It is, and hopefully you will agree. Another thing we need to talk with you all about. Why don't you explain this situation?
Several years ago now, and I think it was soon after we discussed another Erasure topic, maybe Crackers International? I'm not sure. But at some point, we got a lovely message from a friend of the show who offered us the Am I Right EP to give away when we talked about Erasure Chorus, right?
That's exactly right.
Am I right?
You are right.
Okay. And that was awesome. And we had a plan to do that. And we're finally doing it. And now we're trying to find that email or that message that the person sent telling us about this, and we cannot find it.
Yeah, and I have every message pretty much saved that we've received over the course of the podcast. I have most of them saved in folders, and I can't find who sent us the CD.
Yeah.
Somebody was kind enough to send us the Am I Right EP to give away.
The Christmas one.
Yeah, right. To give away on the show. And we're going to give it away along with one of our new limited edition t-shirts that we have. But we would love to be reminded of who it was that sent us the CD, who was so kind to get this CD. It's an unopened copy.
Right.
And then mail it to us.
And I'm sure it was from overseas, right? Probably
I'm
from the UK.
sure.
Yeah.
So if you still are listening and you were the person that sent us that CD, if you were that kind person, please let us know. Reach out to us on our email or social media. We're, of course, at permrecordpodcast@gmail.com. And remind us who you are so we can thank you properly.
Yes, please.
And so the details of the giveaway, we're going to do it like we did with our summer mixtape giveaway.
Make it pretty simple.
Yeah, make it as simple as we can. Just shoot us an email at that email address that I just mentioned. Entitle it something like Erasure Giveaway. And when we release the third episode in this Erasure series, because it's only going to be 3 episodes, folks, we will pick a winner at random and you will win that CD and one of our shirts.
That sounds great. Yeah, that should be pretty easy for everyone to follow. Send us an email to permrecordpodcast@gmail.com. Say Erasure Giveaway in the title. Say, I'd like to be entered in the Erasure Giveaway. Hey, and if you want to, send us your memories of Erasure at that time. That'd be great too. And we will go from there. If you also have Erasure memories that you would like to share with us, in the meantime, you can also use a voicemail, right? And we can get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll give the details on that at the end of the episode, because if you do have a specific memory about this album that you'd like to share, we love getting voicemails to play on the show.
Absolutely.
And getting other voices. I mean, we already have Andrew as another voice, but if we could turn this into a little event and get some listener feedback, that'd be great. So we'll have that voicemail information at the end of the episode.
Yes, yes, yes.
Last thing before we get to the episode is I just want to preempt everybody. When you hear something in this episode, you're going to want to run to your cell phones or your computers to let me know that I made a mistake.
Uh-oh.
I want to preempt that by saying I know I made a mistake. We, at some point in time in the discussion, start talking about Thomas Dolby appearing on our cousin podcast.
Okay.
80sography.
I like that.
We love that podcast.
Yeah.
I make the mistake of saying that Thomas Dolby is on the show to talk about the songs he wrote for Prefab Sprout.
Oh.
I know Thomas Dolby didn't write those songs.
Okay.
I know that he produced the album. I just said that because, well, it was off the cuff.
Yeah, you were caught up in the moment and made a mistake.
Please don't feel the need to let me know that Thomas Dolby didn't write those songs. I understand.
Okay.
So, thanks very much. All right, so we are going to get to the episode. This is a long time coming. It's been a while since we talked about Erasure. And every time we talk about Erasure or the Pet Shop Boys, we like to be joined by our friend Andrew, because he loves these 2 bands and has a great history with them. And it's always awesome to get his insight into the discussion.
Yes, for sure. And I think he's going to have some extra really cool information for us this time around. So can't wait to get this started.
All right, so then we will do that very thing. So here is the first part of 3 episodes on Erasure Chorus, and we hope that you will enjoy it.
Okay, well, I don't know about you, Brian, but I am absolutely thrilled and so excited to have this special guest with us today.
I, as well, am thrilled.
You sound it. You're trying your hardest not to.
I am. I'm trying to rein in my excitement.
Right, yeah, but how can you not be excited when you have such a wonderful person on with you? And that person, of course, is Mr. Andrew Dineley. And you may know him from such things as the Soft Octopus Design Studio, or perhaps the Art on Your Sleeve podcast, or perhaps his many contributions to Classic Pop magazine. Name them all. They're all great things, and maybe you know him from one of them. But if you don't know him yet, shame on you.
And it's definitely time that you met Andrew.
Indeed.
So he's on the video phone all the way from Liverpool, the home of the Fab Four. Of course, by that, I mean Pete Burns, Mike Percy, Tim Lever. Andrew, can you hear us? Are we coming over the ocean okay?
Coming in loud and clear. You forgot to say the home of Eurovision as well this year.
Oh, that's right.
Mm.
Yes, you did just host Eurovision, and that must have been a thrill.
It was very interesting. The city just became something it's never been before. Just seeing so many people from all over the world just here for that week was just insane. But that's a bit off topic. Maybe that's another thing for another podcast.
Okay.
Wait, if I'm not wrong, weren't you also the home of the Dark Knight detective?
Oh.
Yes, yeah. Batman lived on top of the live building for a couple of hours, didn't he? When they were filming it, yeah. So yeah, that's the live building, which is right on the waterfront.
And that was, of course, the last Batman movie with Robert Pattinson, which I thought was really good. Because of COVID, I actually didn't see it in the theater, which is shocking to me because I've been Batman obsessed with my whole life.
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
We keep that sound effect at the ready just in case we ever need it, Andrew. For every episode that we record, it's there in case we need to just
shame on you.
Hit that button.
You're a permanent part of our podcast. But we're really happy to have you here, quote, live today. This is just a real treat. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back after the last. Have we done this 3 times before or 2? We did.
Well, we did Erasure the Innocents. We did Pet Shop Boys Introspective, and we did Erasure Wild.
Those are the main ones.
Right.
Andrew was also on when we talked about Depeche Mode's Momento More.
Yes.
Ah, yes, that's right.
Which, by the way, I'm very disappointed in the level of quality control at this point. I understand they're on a gigantic world tour and everything, but the video that was released for My Favorite Stranger this week, super disappointing.
Oh, terrible. Yeah.
I mean, I don't even mind that they're not in it because I'm sort of used to that at this point, but it seriously was so unimaginative. Just like a bunch of shots of behind a person as they.
I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah,
it made the song worse.
Yeah, and right, yeah, Andrew, you don't even like that song. And I think I said it was my least favorite song in the album.
Yeah, the video did not help it at all.
I think they were listening to that podcast and clearly thought, "How dare he do that? How dare he diss that? And we're going to make that a single now just for that reason."
Yeah, we'll show them.
Although what I think we've discussed this before, but what is a single anyway? It doesn't mean anything, does it? Yeah.
But you know what? We're here to talk about something really good today.
We are. I'm excited. Finally, we've been talking about this literally for years, that we're going to discuss this album. And finally, the time is here. We are going to discuss Erasure's 1991 release, Chorus.
That is the plan. So you know what, to get the ball rolling, even though this would be of interest to no one really, I was really, really shocked when I found the release date for this album, which is, of course, October 14th, 1991, because in my head, I sort of remember going to the record store and getting Alison Moyet Hoodoo and this album at the same time. For the past however many years, 30 years, those 2 albums are firmly cemented in my mind as coming out at the same time. And I remember constantly, like one day I would say, well, I think Alison's doing better than Vince these days. And then I'll sort of change like the next day. Well, maybe Vince is doing, maybe Erasure is better.
Do you mean like in the charts?
No, just like
your personal
quality of the music.
Oh, okay.
As I listened to them, because I was constantly comparing the 2 of them. But I looked up Hoodoo as I was doing the research on Erasure, and that came out in April. So it was out almost like half a year before this. But then I was like, well, at that time, I probably had so few CDs.
Oh, yeah.
That I'd listen to things a lot more often because I had fewer things to listen to.
That is exactly what it was. Yeah.
And also Hoodoo is, I don't know what you guys think about it. Hoodoo is such a strong album that I'm not surprised that 6 months later, I might still be playing it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd agree. I didn't buy the album. I'd sort of drifted away from Alison Moyet at that point. I bought, I think, the singles from it and then never bought the album. But I remember buying Chorus. I remember what the weather was like, and I remember where. In fact, there's a photograph I've got of me having lunch in a gardens in Liverpool, and I've got a little HMV bag, and looking at that photograph, I know what's in that bag. That's that kind of visceral and emotional connection that you have with physical product that you don't have with downloads, which is what we were talking about earlier. It's literally, I remember so much about the day of that release. It's just bizarre, isn't it?
I love that though.
A lot of times when you reminisce about your first day of sale for albums and stuff, you always have some kind of cool thing like, well, here in England, we got a poster with it or we got stickers. Do you remember, did you get anything with this album?
Yeah, well, there was a limited edition version of it that came in a sort of clamshell box that was it's sort of similar designed to the EBX, the EBX single boxes that came out. So it's that sort of shape. I'm showing you it on screen here, but this is absolutely useless to people listening. But that's what it sounds like.
Okay, very nice.
So there was a limited edition box that was available for the first couple of days that came with tons of inserts and a little booklet and things. So yeah, there was probably a slight variant to what you got in the US, I imagine.
Yep, ours was just a standard plastic jewel case.
Nothing
Not a big
special.
event.
No, but hey, at least they came out in the US, right?
Yep.
We've got to be happy about that.
Yep. And I remember I was in college. I walked from my dorm room into town, which didn't take all that long. And I was in good shape back then because I was still a kid. But we had one record store in town, Record City.
Yep.
And I walked into town on the day of release to make sure I got that as soon as I could.
Had you had the single? Had you had Chorus as a single that trailed the album?
Yep, I had that on a cassette. For some reason, I'm kind of mad about it now. I got the 12-inch single on cassette, which they were sort of popular at the time. I remember getting Personal Jesus on cassette as the 12-inch.
Well, that was easier to play, right? You could play that in your car. You could play that in your Walkman. You only had one CD player at the time. So as far as convenience, the cassette was actually better for you at that time.
And I didn't have my turntable at school because I originally went to college and took my turntable. And then the dean of housing came over one time to tell me that it was so loud that if he ever had to come to my room again, he would take my whole stereo away from me. So I promptly that weekend took my stereo back home because I didn't want to risk losing it.
This is the first Erasure album that I bought on CD, though, on release, because Wild was before this, wasn't it?
Yes.
And I bought that on vinyl and then got a CD player and then went back and bought Wild and Innocence and the Circus and Wonderland on CD. But yeah, this is the first one that on release day was CD for me.
Same thing with me.
Yeah.
I went back and bought those same ones. This was the first one for CD for me. And of course, I'm now buying them all again on CD as they bring out the 2 and 3 disc reissues here in the 21st century. So when you bought this, it was actually a pretty big event for you and fans in England because Erasure was on quite a roll with singles at the time. I mean, this was like a high point for them, right?
Yeah, commercially, I think they were very much at their peak. And certainly for me, they were probably, one of my favorite artists at that point. My kind of commitment to Erasure lasted for a long time. I mean, I'm still a fan and I still buy releases, but at this point, they were probably my favorite band of all time, probably. Yeah, I think they were, maybe with Pet Shop Boys, but possibly more than Pet Shop Boys around that time.
Wow.
I know.
So with that in mind, why don't we talk about some chart positions?
Okay.
And see how different countries may have had different reactions to the band and different levels of embracing them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We love to do that, don't we?
We do.
Well, given all of the hype that we've been giving it and how excited Andrew was for it in the UK, it's not a surprise to see that it did really, really well in the UK.
It did about as well
as you could do. Yeah, right. It got to number 1 on the UK chart. So that's fantastic.
I think as well, if you're considering, because the single Chorus was a bit of a shock, I think, because it wasn't, I mean, it's a great song, but it's not like a super, it's not like Oh L'Amour or, any of those super Vince Clarke, ultra catchy pop songs. It's a little bit unusual. It's a very sort of analog, a bit hard electronic sound. And I don't think it was a massive hit, was it? I don't know if you got statistics for it, but did it do the top 10 in the UK? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Did it?
Premiered at number 3.
Really? God, I don't remember it getting that high in the charts. Wow, that surprises me.
Surprised me too.
Yeah.
It was also a top 10 album in Argentina, where it hit number 3, Austria, where it hit number 5, and Ireland, where it peaked at number 4. So that's pretty good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's respectable. And, even in the US, it's not great, but it's okay, right? For in the US, it got to number 29, but that was better than Australia.
We'll talk about Australia and Terry Kemp in a second. I already warned him yesterday that I'm going to be calling him out on this episode.
Oh, no.
But here in the US, Andrew, it peaked at number 29, which I was surprised by. And I actually think that's really good.
I do.
Because Wild didn't do anything in terms of the pop singles charts here. Like they had the 2 big hits here in America off of The Innocents, Chains of Love and A Little Respect were both top 20 hits. And then the next album didn't perform like that.
And I don't know where the album itself charted.
Yeah, I forget. We must have said it on our episode.
Yeah.
It didn't have a successful top 40 hit. So the fact that people were still remembering the name Erasure and interested enough to pick up the album and took it to 29 in the United States, I think that's pretty good. Their pop singles top 100 history here in the US is so bizarre. Like, we most of the time don't pay any attention to them. But then those 2 hits off of The Innocents came out of nowhere. And then we skip like 3 albums. We just don't care about them. And then all of a sudden, Always, for some reason, I think it hit like number 6 or some crazy high.
It
chart.
was, remarkably popular.
But then they never follow it up. Like Run to the Sun is the follow-up, which doesn't do well. And then the next album comes out and no one cares again.
Yeah.
It's just so weird why every 6 years or so they'll
just pop in.
Yep. And then disappear for good.
Yeah.
Could never figure it out. It was frustrating as somebody who took this stuff very personally back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, Australia. I don't know if you saw this, Andrew, but our friends Down Under, led of course by their leader, Terry Kemp, only took this album to number 93.
Shocking. And I'm supposed to be going to Australia next year. I'm not going now.
Well, I don't blame the citizens of Australia. I blame Terry.
Wow. How could you do that with my birthday twin?
You guys may share a birthday, but I don't share opinions on where albums should chart with him.
Oh,
So I want to know why you
you're
felt
the worst.
So this was their 5th album, their 6th release since their debut in 1986. I think this is shocking, guys. This band, like Andrew said, was crazy popular. This is sort of like their imperial phase where they can do no wrong. They were working so hard to get where they were. They had albums or EPs released in 86, 87, 88, an EP in 88, 89, and then 1991. And each record was so good. It was like they weren't running out of ideas. Can you imagine if one of our bands like maintained that pace these days? It would be impossible.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've just been working on an article for Classic Pop, actually, and I was looking back at some of these key artists, and so many of them that we hold dear were just so prolific. If you look at Depeche Mode's release, it was for the first 4 albums, it was 4 years in a row. OMD did, I think, 4 or 5 years in a row. We were so spoiled, weren't we, looking back on it? Because now it's like you're lucky if you get an album every 5 or 6 years.
Yep. But to a certain extent, I feel like they wouldn't have become the bands that we would go on to love so much if that didn't happen. The growth between A Broken Frame and Some Great Reward is so impressive. They become such a good band, and you can see the growing pains and see where they evolved and stuff. That would never, like, if they didn't keep that pace, if they allowed themselves the current 4 years between album, they never would have got to Some Great Reward. It would have been 20 years before they became songwriters of that caliber. And maybe they wouldn't have, because they wouldn't have been exercising that songwriting muscle as frequently.
The difference perhaps between Depeche Mode and Erasure and the way that they record as well was that I feel that with Depeche Mode, they were constantly embracing new technology, and you hear that in the songs and the production. Whereas with Erasure, the sounds sonically don't differ that much. I mean, maybe the way that they're written and the production, they work with different people, but Vince Clarke holds such tight control over everything that there is much more of a standard sort of Erasure sound, whereas I think Depeche Mode sound is a lot more variable.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I always sort of thought that while Vince didn't grow his sound as drastically as Depeche Mode, I always felt like behind the scenes, he was learning. Like if you put Vince Clarke in the studio and gave him like a quiz, like do these 10 things, he could do all 10 of them, and he could do them much faster than, say, Martin Gore. Like I feel Martin Gore was probably not paying much attention to what was happening technologically, and that Vince just had that curiosity about it and wanted to know everything he could.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that kind of early adoption of sampling and fairlights and, just kind of pushing technology right to its limits is, very Vince, isn't it? You look back at those very early pictures of him at Blackwing Studio, basically sitting in a cupboard with a fairlight on his knee.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about his technological choices for this album, aren't we?
Yeah, he was very disappointed with one of the major technologies that they used to record at the time, which is going to lead to the sound of this album, right?
Right. Yeah. So we're talking about him being very, very forward thinking in technology and its use. And yet I think we're going to be a little surprised when we talk about the making of this album.
What is the technology that he kind of has a bone to pick with on this album?
One of my favorites, MIDIs.
Yes, you actually used to refer to yourself as the MIDI girl.
I did. I still have a folder of bookmarks on my browser called MIDI files. Now, I went to look for some of them yesterday as I was thinking about that. And a lot of those pages are dead, believe it or not. Can you believe that they wouldn't exist anymore?
Oh,
but
your bookmarks from the mid-90s aren't valid
right,
anymore?
yeah. But I do still have quite a few of the MIDI files, and I had them saved off, thankfully.
And I remember you sitting around, we'd be in the computer room and you would be excited and you'd say, listen to what I found, and you'd play like a MIDI file of fingers and thumbs.
Yes, which is I still have that one. I love that one. But it's very funny to me now thinking that, he was eschewing that technology, and I love fingers and thumbs, but it was also in this realm of analog. Yet I love the MIDI version.
Oh, if you can find that, you have to play it. I'd love to hear that.
Oh, yeah. That should be no problem.
I will add it. So Vince was not happy with MIDI technology. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you're a bit more, well, maybe you can explain it. You're more knowledgeable about, I think, the actual recording technology than I am. Did you read what Vince's problem was with MIDIs?
No, but just on knowing that he came from an analog background and was very used to kind of sequences and things triggering each other, MIDI just changed the way that electronic music was recorded completely. So I can imagine it being a bit temperamental at the start and not perhaps doing what he wanted to do, or him being able to control it in the same way that he would with all of those old Moog synths and his kind of Pro One and all the stuff that he'd used right through Depeche Mode, Yazoo, the assembly. But MIDI was kind of just kind of being born around this time, a couple of years before.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was the fact that he didn't have the minute control over everything that he liked to have. It sort of goes into detail that when MIDI plays a series of program notes, the notes would be played one at a time in sequence, and to his ear, it sounded a little messy. He said that the song that really convinced him to re-embrace analog and to go away from all this digital stuff was he was listening to Delight's B-side called What Is Love, which was the B-side to Groove Is in the Heart, and he loved the timing of things on that song. He said, like, I could never do this song with the MIDI setup that we've used on Wild. We could never record this song. Because of that, he broke out one of his old sequencers called a Roland MC4, which actually came into being the same year as Vince Clarke's professional career, 1981. The limitations of the Roland sort of led to the second rule of the album. The first rule of the album was all analog synths, and the Roland was not able to play chords. So that became the second rule, which is not anything I ever thought of before, but there are no chords on this album.
Yeah, I came across a couple of really good articles in interviews with him. And one was from a magazine called Sound on Sound, and it was a cover feature on Vince Clarke. And the article was called Sold on This 3-Minute Song. And it was from December of 1991. So it was just a little bit after this album came out. That interview does a track by track snippet of each song. So I'm going to share those with you as we go through the album.
Cool.
The other interview I got was with Vince in a magazine called Music Technology. And that was from August 1992 while they were on tour. And they talk about the making of this album. And he says, we decided to give ourselves definite ground rules to make it sound different to the previous albums. So we only used analog synthesizers, no drum machines, and no MIDI as far as we could. We used MC4s instead and ARP sequencers, analog sequencing. It's very difficult, really, when you're trying to keep up with all the new gear, not to just get into the habit of using preset sounds. It's not that it's too difficult to program the new synths. It's just that the programming on them is so good already. You change the sound and maybe individualize it, but in the end, you're making it worse than it was. At least with analog synthesizers, you don't have that problem because you're starting from scratch.
So wait, he said they didn't use drum machines?
Correct.
So are all the drums on this album like played on one of those crazy synthesizers with all the wires and plugs? Because someone like me, I just use the term drum machine for any non-live drummer. I always say, oh, it's not a real drummer, it's a drum machine.
What I can tell you is that Martin Phillips, the album's producer, worked with the drums. And in this same article, he says on the album, Martin helped a lot with the drum programming. It was much more interesting to do, though, because as I said, we didn't use any drum machines. We tried to generate all the percussion sounds from synths.
Oh, wow.
We got about 99% of them. The only sound we couldn't get was a crash. We couldn't synthesize a crash. So that was the one sample we used.
Wow, that's wild. See, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, I mean, that was the technique that was used on the 2 Yazoo albums as well. That
really?
Yeah, so something like the song Don't Go, the percussion sounds on that are all from a keyboard. They're all from a Sequential Circuits Pro 1 keyboard, which I had for a while, and I used to love playing along with it with the exact same noises.
That's awesome.
You can just get some beautifully kind of crunchy, very, very, I can't think of the right word really, just very, very analog-y, great deep sounds from those synthesizers. And that was what he knew. That was his comfort zone, wasn't it, from back in the day? And also the thing about not using chords. I mean, I remember when Yaz split up, that was one of the things that Alison Moyet was quite critical of, wasn't she? She was, she wanted to be more traditional as a musician, certainly as that came out on her first album. The way those songs are so different to Yazoo. But if you compare that to the first Alison Moyet album to the last Yazoo album, they're just worlds apart. And it's things like that, the fact that there are no chords or very few chords. And that's largely down to the technology. When you're using monophonic synthesizers, it's really hard to do chords because you have to build them up track by track rather than playing them 4 or 6 fingers at the same time.
Oh, and you mentioned tracks. I want to say something about the recording that I think you'll really like, Bri.
Mm-hmm.
In the other article I mentioned, the Sound on Sound cover feature, he says, we were recording on 48 track and the most we got up to was 46. It sounds a bit over the top, like Queen, but of course the tracks aren't all used at the same time. When you've got 48 tracks, you don't bother to put 2 things on the same track. You just use all the tracks up.
Oh yeah, that's totally understandable.
Yeah, but I love that he was like over the top like Queen.
People may not agree with this at first take, but in terms of showmanship and live performance and stuff, I would say there isn't too much different between Andy Bell and Freddie Mercury. They're both awesome performers that have stage personalities. Like I think based on everything I've read and seen, like Andy Bell off stage is totally different than Andy Bell on stage. And same is true with Freddie Mercury. They both like to take off their shirts.
Yes, that's true.
They both wear really short shorts when they sing.
Yeah.
Those 2 guys are very similar.
Okay. At first, I laughed because in my head, I was sure you were going to say Vince Clarke rather than Andy Bell.
Oh, no.
I was like,
There's quite a difference between Vince Clarke and Freddie Mercury.
Yeah.
That's just what gay men in England are like. We're all of us are like that. We just, I strut around the shop dressed like Freddie Mercury or Andy Bell, and I go out to buy some breakfast cereal or whatever.
Yeah, I can't see it now because you're sitting down. But before, I did notice that you have very short shorts on right now.
And ruby slippers.
Oh, very nice.
I don't really have a good place to insert this quote that I have in my notes.
Okay.
So I'm going to just offer it up right here.
All right.
Sort of goes along with it. We're talking about all these different changes that Vince is making to the songwriting on this album. And he's really making some bold moves. I found a really good quote from Daniel Miller, who was talking about the fact that there's a public persona of Vince being very risk adverse. Like the general public, if you think of Vince Clarke, you think he's a very safe musician. And it probably stems to like what Andrew said about that his sound is often very similar to what came before. Like you don't usually hear a drastic change in the work of Vince Clarke. And I think that I maybe had bought into that over the years. But in the reissue of Chorus, there's a quote from Daniel Miller, and he says, I never thought of anything Vince did as risky. He left Depeche Mode. That was pretty risky. Yazoo split up. That was pretty risky. He started a project called The Assembly and only released 1 single. That was pretty risky. And then he found himself a singer with almost no experience whatsoever. That was pretty risky too. But personally, I never think of those things as being risky. For me, it's always about whether it's good or not. I was really surprised by that because everything he says right there is true. Over the years, we've come to accept that they record Speak and Spell and Vince Clarke leaves. I always sort of think about that on the side of Depeche Mode. Like I always think, oh, that was kind of a dick move. But from Vince's point of view, I understand he didn't like the live aspect of Depeche Mode and being on the children's TV shows and doing the silly things to promote it. But still, what a crazy thing to walk away from. That was risky. He could have never been heard from again. he really has made some, I'll use the word again, some risky moves in his career. And I was really surprised to have that pointed out to me. I don't think that the songwriting rules on chorus are as risky as some of those things, but it is cool how he does keep things interesting. And he's doing it today, like his solo album, which is coming out, which I'm not sure I'm super excited about, but every single song has a drone, like a single note drone that's going to be playing in the background of it. Just always has some sort of, I don't know, not a gimmick, but something catchy that keeps things interesting in his head and keeps him engaged.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that he's a creative, isn't he? That's what excites him and stimulates him. I mean, he's incredibly prolific as well, beyond all of the stuff that you've discussed. If you just look at the amount of tracks he's remixed alone, he churns remixes out for people all the time. Listening to his remixes, you can hear him in there. He's got such a definable something that is just Vince Clarke that's hard to pin down. But he's just an incredible talent. And I think that Chorus is just a great example of that Vince Clarke sound that we all love, really. It was great when it came out, because as much as I loved The Innocents, in some ways, this album felt much more Erasure-y than The Innocents did. You need a Stephen Hague more in The Innocents than you can Vince Clarke, perhaps.
Agreed. And it's funny that you mentioned the Vince Clarke sound of Chorus, which I agree with now. But at the time of release, as I'll harp on quite a bit when we go track by track, I was not hearing Vince Clarke in these songs, and that was a problem for me at the time. Sarah, you mentioned Martin Phillips.
Yes, right.
That is the producer that works with the band on this album. Refresh my memory. Drama was produced by, do we remember who that was? I mean, Wild. Does anyone recall off the top of your head?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Because I remember they had a bad experience on The Innocents. Vince did not enjoy that. They never worked with Stephen Hague again.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you looking it up, Andrew?
I am, yeah. It was produced by Gareth Jones and Mark Saunders Wild.
Okay. So those are two guys that Vince is probably pretty comfortable with. At least Saunders mixed a bunch of the songs for Crackers International, I seem to recall.
Right.
So he must have gone from Stephen Hague, who he didn't like, to some people that he was familiar with. He probably enjoyed that. And then here we're getting a new producer, Martin Phillips. He worked with The Beloved. Were they pretty big?
Yeah, definitely. There were only 3 albums, and the first 2 certainly were massive.
I love that first one. Oh my goodness. I put one of those songs on my mixtape that we did.
Hello. I remember on our college radio station, we played the song Hello.
Sometimes I feel we must be going mad. Hello, Peter. Hello, Paul. Saints and sinners, welcome all. Tommy Cannon, Bobby Ball. Hello.
Here on the top 40 charts, The Beloved weren't really a thing here in the United States, but they were a great band. Jesus Jones is a band that here in America, they caught on for one song, Right Here, Right Now, and he produced that. And of course, he worked with our friend Rob Rowe, Cause and Effect, on the second Cause and Effect album, Trip, which is still one of my favorites.
Oh, that's such a good album
of all time.
Love that album.
And it's all right with me. And it's all right if that's how you want it to be.
I think he was a pretty good mix for Erasure.
I think he was probably more flexible than Stephen Hague had been. I think, again, I was doing some research for an article about OMD, and they just said Stephen Hague was a complete control freak, and admitted that they were control freaks as well. And it's just really hard when those two things collide, because something has to give, and it's just hard to negotiate that, really. So I think maybe Phillips was more forgiving than Hague.
Yeah, I have a good quote from Vince in that Sound on Sound article about Martin Phillips being the producer. It's very difficult to be objective, so you need someone else. Having Martin in the studio, it was a bit like a love-hate relationship. Myself and Andy don't argue, you see, so we feel someone else has to suffer for our art. There were conflicts in the studio, but it got good results. I think you need that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
They did a little test period of working together. They had no songs written for the album. They said, we're going to record this album, but we don't have anything ready. And they just sort of had a test meeting to see how things were going to go. And it went really, really well. The three really got along well. And they wrote the very basic structure for, I think, Perfect Stranger in the time that they spent together. So they said, yeah, this is great. We're getting on like a house on fire. Let's go work on the album. So they go to Toulouse, France, to a studio named Polygon Studios. As soon as they got there, everything came to a crashing halt. They no longer got along. They were having difficulties with the work, and the problem stemmed from a number of things. Andy was really depressed by the Gulf War, and he saw on the news people going away to fight in this war, and some of them are going to die, and he just was impacted by this. It made him very unenthusiastic about writing songs. There was very little to do in this town. They rarely left the studio to even go out for a meal or to sightsee, to do touristy things. There really was nothing to go look at. And I couldn't find out what the problem was, but Martin Phillips became ill during these sessions. I don't know what it was. So all of that combined to what they all thought was a pretty bad experience after the initial meeting went really well. And when they got back home, when things were done, Daniel Miller said, well, you don't even really have enough songs for a full album. Like, you are going to have to do more. So that first round of recording was not a great experience for anybody. They then traveled to Hamburg, Germany, a spot that all these early synth bands really seem to do well. And the Germans seem to love their music, and the bands seem to do well creatively when they go to Germany. As you might expect, they had a fantastic time in Germany. They went out often. Andy dated someone who lived there, and they all made friends that they would go on to keep in contact with. And Vince said that they just had a great time there living life. And that's where they finished the rest of the songs needed for the album, and they left with a very positive attitude and felt very enthusiastic about the record that they were going to release.
I think there's an allure for Germany, isn't there, with that country, because of the sort of artists that have recorded some of their best work there. If you look at Bowie, or even, Kraftwerk's influence over all of these people, it must be almost like a spiritual place to go and record.
Yeah, and funny you say Kraftwerk, because I took a quote from Andy. I didn't know where to put it, so I just have it in my notes. But he says, I don't think I appreciated the purity of what Vince was trying to do at the time in Hamburg, but it was probably the closest thing to Kraftwerk that we've ever done. So There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's just that analog sort of purity, isn't it, really?
And I know a lot of people know this, but just in case it's not something that you've learned over your fandom of Erasure, Erasure's writing process is basically, I think it's interesting, based on what the final product of Erasure's songs sound like. Vince and Andy will go into a room with either a guitar or a piano, one of those two things. And in 30 minutes or so, they emerge with basic melodies and la-la lyrics, as Andy called them, just sort of syllables that fill up the melody line. And as Andy finalizes lyrics, Vince will sit down and turn those components, those chords from his guitar, he will turn that into a full-fledged Erasure song. But every Erasure song, regardless of how electronic and how synthetic it is, starts off with a very organic origin, which I remember when I first found that out, I was really, really shocked.
I think it's that the organic, natural instruments have a fluidity to them, don't you? That you can just adapt and change. It's like, slow that down, or make that quieter. It's much more easier a piano or a guitar, in a way that a computer, you've got to go in and type in numbers and alter variables.
Right.
It's similar with design for me. Everything I do is designed on a computer, but the initial ideas, I'll always get a piece of paper out and some pencils and just scribble it down, because to lay a page out or to design a logo, to do it on a computer first, it's just so much faffing around with, boxes that you have to put numbers in, and, creating a color with, cyan and magenta. And yeah, it's just, no, I get where Vince is coming from.
I love that.
It's crazy to think that a song like Chorus, which is made up of just, a lot of it's just strange sounds, like sonar sounding sounds,
Yeah.
feedback, like that came from
Maybe a guitar or a piano.
wild.
Yeah, but I love that.
I think we talked about this at some point. I can't remember when we would have done it, because this is the latest Erasure album that we've talked about. But this is the point where Vince and Andy kind of stop working together in the studio. And like, Andy will do his vocals late at night because he's sort of a night owl, and Vince will come in sort of like it's his job. He'll come early in the morning and work during the day. This is where that sort of starts. And that starts because Vince was the one example is Andy said he spent 8 hours working on a hi-hat sound and he didn't get the same enjoyment out of that Vince did. So this is the phase where they start to just sort of work separately. Andy's going to enjoy his time during the day and come in late at night when Vince is already gone.
Yeah.
Which has got to be rough on the producer because now you're working 2 shifts because you've got to work with each member of the band.
Oh, that's true. I have a couple notes I have a nice quote from Vince on the mixing of this album.
Okay.
Do you know anything about that?
I just know that David Bascombe is the mixer of this album.
Yeah. And Vince says that Martin mixed a couple of tracks and we weren't really happy with the way that they turned out. So we decided to get someone else to do the mixing. We got David Bascombe, which was good because he saw the album in a completely different way. He didn't actually change things, but he brought everything out as it should have been. And he's just really good at making things sound good. Analog stuff tends to sound a bit dull, so you have to brighten things up a little bit.
And that's a name that if you're a fan of this kind of music, David Bascombe, if you go check your collection, he's going to be on so many things that you probably don't know that he's on. You know, of course, we know him mainly, I think, or the first time we encountered his name was probably the producer of Music for the Masses.
Right.
But he's worked with Tears for Fears and he's done this with Erasure, and very talented fellow.
Indeed.
Very, very interesting as well. On the My 80sography podcast, that he's interviewed him, hasn't he? And I just found it fascinating because the role of a mixer, really, it's a bit kind of, we don't necessarily understand what the creative responsibility is of that role. So it was interesting on that podcast, which I'd recommend everyone listens to anyway.
Definitely. I love that.
Such a great podcast. It was really interesting hearing him talk about the work that he did with all of these artists that we like. I don't think he particularly went into much detail about Erasure from what I remember, but he's a very interesting and clever man.
Speaking of My 80sography, did you listen to the Thomas Dolby episode? I'm sure you did.
Yeah, definitely.
With Prefab Sprout. Once again, like Prefab is a band that I really, really enjoy now. And I'd never listened to them until you and our friend Tony Miracle, you wagged your finger at me and said, you really need to listen to this album. So I did, and I love it. So that was a great episode because I like all those songs, and it was cool to hear Thomas Dolby talk about the process of writing them. But the coolest thing about that episode is, you know, if you get Thomas Dolby on a podcast, you're going to get a good number of downloads. I don't know how many downloads he got, but you know, it's going to be a lot. And he put a commercial for our podcast in that episode.
Oh,
so, of course, appreciate that. So
yeah.
I meant to send an email and thank him. Mark is the name of the fellow who does that podcast.
Well, I'll thank him right here and right now. Thank you so much, Mark.
So sonically, that's how the album was built. That's where it's coming from in terms of their rules and what they want to sound like. But every album, of course, has an audio component and it has a visual component. And this packaging for this album, I'm wearing the t-shirt right now in case you guys haven't noticed. The visuals for this album have always impressed me. And when you have the visual and artistic guru that Andrew Dineley is, you've got to, take advantage of that. So let's see what we can learn about the design and the graphics of this classic Erasure album. Anything of interest for us, Andrew?
Yeah, lots really. And I think looking back at it, because doing my research for this episode, I got all of my 12-inch singles and CD singles and boxes out and stuff just to look at them all. And I think it stands up as a really strong body of work. It's intriguing, isn't it, really, the images that were used? And there's obviously a lot going on there, a lot of thoughts gone into it. There's a lot of theory behind the way that things were done and why they were done. And I think interestingly as well, that the Erasure logo that was created for this time is probably the one that we all remember as the strongest. Certainly for me, that Erasure logo is the one that I think of as their logo.
Yeah, I agree.
Such an iconic design. I know that word's overused, but it does look like the logo of a multinational company or something, and that was deliberate in its design. So when I wrote the piece for Classic Pop magazine about Vince Clarke, which kind of covered his entire career from Depeche Mode through all of the other acts, I spoke to the designer of this album because I happen to know her as well, which was handy.
Nice.
Sean Cook, brilliant designer. She's an academic now, but still does design. But she did a lot of work for the healthcare sector as well, which is what I'd done in my past. So our kind of careers overlapped a little bit. But she kind of gave me the background on it because she was working at Me Company at the time, which is a great design company that was responsible for so much graphic design of that period. And also they've worked with Erasure quite a lot as well before then. So they designed the cover for Wild and the Circus and even Wonderland. but not under that name. So she'd been working with Peter Saville previous to this, and then ended up working at Me Company and worked on this actual album and the singles that went with it. So she was able to give me some lovely little insights into the creative side of it, because I think that these stories are really not told, are they? You don't find this stuff online. So I quite like being able to get it direct from the horse's mouth, really. So this is sort of paraphrasing from the article I wrote for the magazine. So in 1991, Erasure shifted directions sonically and visually for the release of this album. And Sean, who was working at the company at the time, remembered how the designs came together. I asked her about the album and the singles, and she initially told me about the chorus single, which obviously trailed the album itself. She said that they were experimenting with color copy collages, and the scales on the single were scanned from real fish, which I think is hilarious. The idea that we're kind of squashing a halibut into a scanner or something. And then printing out color copies of it and then cutting them up and gluing them down and then rescanning them. So it's that sort of point where technology was very much part of design, but not 100%. Not everything was created 100%. So I like that idea that you've got that technology being used in an organic way, really. So you rescan it and then you cut it out and glue it down and rescan it. But she said that the concept for the album was styled around pharmaceuticals and biotech. And if you look at it, you can see that really, the use of the E pattern that was repeated over the designs. And just looking at the back of the album cover in the bottom left-hand corner, the little 10 mil thing, she said was all inspired by medicine packaging. And the stock photography that was used is just a visual reference to cliched pharmaceutical promotional brochures, those images of happy families, running along looking healthy. And because I remember at the time thinking, what is all this about? Particularly with this edition that I had, that had all these little cards inside. You'd be expecting it to be pictures of Vince and Andy,
right?
Somewhere, but there's one of men on a construction site.
Yeah. Did you think it was a mistake, perhaps? Like, what did they put the wrong graphics with this?
Edgy design thing to do, certainly, wasn't it, really? But stroke of genius in some ways. But the other images that were included of Vince and Andy, the images of their heads, even they came about through, even though they look very, very computer generated, what she said they did was, well, I'll read from the article. So Andy and Vince's heads on the cover were composite images. So the photographs were taken as silhouettes by Monica Curtin, who interestingly was the woman who did the photography on the inside sleeve of Wonderland. The picture of Vince and Andy and the black and white image of them surrounded by boxes, and it looks like they're in a loft somewhere. So it's the same photographer, but very, very different style. Monica Curtin photographed their silhouettes, and Vince and Andy had actual MRI scans done. And the coloured areas inside their heads were colour photocopy collages, so similar to the scanning of the fish for the single. The pink and purple auras around their heads were taken from images of Kirlian plant photography, which were then manipulated and wrapped around the silhouettes. So if anyone doesn't know what Kirlian photography is, it's when you have a collection of photographic techniques that are used to capture the phenomenon of electrical coronal discharges. So it's kind of basically trying to photograph auras, as some people believe in auras, and it's, I'm seeing a pink aura, which means this, or a blue aura, which means that. So that was what they were trying to visually put across in those images, which I think are really strong images, actually.
Oh yeah, I agree. It definitely stays with you. Like, I know that the artwork from I Say is impressive. It looks like those animation cells and everything, but there are a lot of times where I can't remember what that album cover looked like in my head right now. I actually can't picture it. I don't know what it
very
looks like.
Blue.
And then the self-titled Erasure with the really long songs. For the life of me right now, I can't think of that album cover, but I have never forgotten these scans of their heads with the auras around them. This is an album cover I would never lose track of in my brain. It's one of their most striking covers.
Oh, yeah.
It's also very cohesive, I think, as a campaign. If you look at the album and the singles that came from it, they all hang together really nicely. As does I Say, but I think sometimes that suffered at trying to be too clever. If you look at the amount of people that were involved in the design of that album, I think there were like 4 or 5 different designers. There were illustrators and 3D computer people, and it almost looks like it was a nice idea, but got a bit lost in the execution, whereas I think that this is a strong concept that's executed really, really well.
I remember at the time, I wasn't quite sure what to make of this. My thoughts on it were just that they were trying to present themselves as like a corporation, not like the Sputnik Corporation is capable of plenty of diabolical things I would expect, but kind of a benevolent corporation.
So I found on YouTube an interview that Vince and Andy did on a Mexican talk show back in 1991. And the person who posted this interview did in little excerpts, just 1 or 2 minute excerpts of the entire interview instead of posting the whole thing, which was helpful because then, there'd be a certain topic. And I found one on the topic of the artwork. And I thought, oh, I've got to share this. It was a really interesting conversation because the host presenter was talking in Spanish. They had earpieces, so they were getting it translated into their heads, and then they were replying in English. So the conversation was a little hard to follow if you don't know Spanish, but I got the gist of it. Andy said they wanted to have photographs of their auras. He said you can't actually do that, so they had to kind of fake it. and then Vince said that they wanted to show the electricity that generates between himself and Andy. But Andy did say that they had brain scans. So he confirmed, yes, they had the MRIs.
Uh-huh.
And then Andy said the other photos were what big corporations wanted you to think life was like. He said it was a farce. And then the woman pointed to the picture of the people on the beach. And she said, you think this is fake? You don't think there are people who live like this? And he's like, well, not quite like that. He said, I would expect to also see ugly people on the beach. and I was like, and I heard her repeating that in Spanish,
Feo?
Fea, yeah, a la playa, yeah. So that just made me laugh. That was a fun little excerpt to watch and listen to.
It's not a million miles away from what New Order did with Peter Saville around the Republic era as well. A lot of that stuff used stock photography.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think of the Love to Hate You, and I always think of Regret. I think of them as very similar because it's, the same idea kind of.
The student became the master, though, because this came first.
Yeah. What's interesting as well about the limited edition one, where it's got the scans, the MRI scans on the back of the cards, it actually provides all the patient data as well about what the actual brain scans showed. So, rather than putting information about production or even song lyrics, you actually get all of the brain scan data. So if you really want to know the density of Vince Clarke's brain, you can find that out in the limited edition book.
That's fantastic. That's like answering the question, how does his brain work? Well, here, we have some data for you. You can look at that.
That's crazy.
So that's all I've got in terms of the design.
Well, that was wonderful.
I now remember what the cover of Erasure looks like. It's like a painting of them.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of kind of like an oil painting, very pastel, dark pastels kind of.
I like the album cover. The man who did those illustrations was just so lovely when I was doing the Vince Clarke piece, and was very enthusiastic about the whole time. And because he did the video as well for the Stay With Me, and he hand painted all the sets for that. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a really lovely man.
I love it.
So we're going to get to the track by track in a second, but we always like to touch on a review of the album as a whole. So I think we each have one review of the record. My review that I brought to the table is from our friend David McElroy, co-author of Halo.
Very cool.
A book about Depeche Mode's Violator, and he has the blog Almost Predictable, almost, one of my favorite destinations on the internet. And this is not Depeche Mode, but occasionally he talks about another band.
Oh, well, how nice of him.
Not very often, but occasionally.
Well,
so I had to jump at the chance to bring something from David into this episode. So here's what David had to say about Chorus. Chorus is Erasure's finest album. It contains 10 near-perfect tracks, all of which are stunning examples of synthpop or whatever you want to label it. Like most people who grew up when I grew up, I was a fan of Erasure thanks to their seemingly unstoppable run of fantastic singles in the mid to late 1980s. To dismiss them because they're too poppy or whatever is short-sighted. Every so often you have to give in and just accept that perfect electronic music should have a place in your life. For me, Erasure went off the boil with Wild, which was just too mixed. There are some great songs there, drama and piano song, but overall it wasn't up to the standard of the Innocents, and I lost a bit of interest in them. Chorus reignited that interest to the extent that I still believe that this is one of the most important electronic music albums of all time.
Wow.
So I brought that album. I brought that review because he's so enthusiastic about it. He's so over the top in love with it that I enjoyed reading it, but I also think he's maybe a little too in love with it. I don't think I love it as much as he does.
I'd agree with him in terms of comparing it to Wild and how Wild was very disconnected and varied and doesn't hang together as a cohesive collection of songs in the same way that this does. This album definitely feels like a contained package.
Yeah. Even when I was a youth at the peak of interest in Wild, I loved Wild as long as I skipped a couple songs each time I listened to it. I never really had to skip much of anything on here. I did skip one song at the time that we'll get to. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. This is, as one collection of tunes, this one is so much stronger than Wild.
People probably won't be surprised to if they listen back to our Wild episode about, trying to think of the polite word, but none of us are particularly fond of La Gloria, are we?
Well, I think it
Yeah.
just fit with the title, right? Wild. It was kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
I think I remember saying something to that effect. All right. Well, I've got, thankfully, a Smash Hits review to share with you all. I had to go to an entirely different website to get this, you know?
Oh, because it's the 90s.
Right. Yeah. Thankfully, there is another gentleman out there who's scanning all the 90s issues of Smash Hits. So I found that one. It was in the 16th through 29th October 1991 issue. And this review is by Johnny D. I don't know who that is, but we're going to hear what he has to say about Chorus. Erasure have well and truly got the hang of this catchy electro pop tunes lark with a string of singles so bright and spangly that it's impossible to stop yourself merrily singing along. Apart from the singles, however, this album is completely lacking for those light and fluffy pop moments we've come to expect. Instead, Chorus is chock full of stodgy, dreary ballads and the kind of frightening techno music that they play at McDonald's to make you eat your cheeseburgers quicker. If you were expecting an album of hip-swiveling ecstasy, then you'll be disappointed. 5 out of 10.
It's harsh.
If I read that at the time of release, if I read that the day after I walked into town, college-age Brian, I would have agreed with that 100%.
Uh-huh.
Now, time has made me a much wiser person, and my opinions are different, but I really was looking for those light and poppy moments that he mentions there.
And you didn't find them here.
Not nearly as much as I wanted to.
Okay.
I think the songcraft is there. It's just that the production isn't as poppy, is it? They're not polished in the same way that they were on The Innocents and things. I think that the songs are as good, if not stronger. Even in fact, some of these songs on this album remain my favorite Erasure songs. They'd definitely be in my top 10, but they're not instant. And I think that's what people expect of Erasure, which is what I was talking about earlier with that Vince Clarke commercial plastic pop sound. You know, there's a certain quality that people expect that isn't there with this album on first listen. But it's more of an investment. You have to listen to these songs a lot more over and over again. The craft is there, but the production in some ways it doesn't shout as loudly as it has previously.
It's more challenging than anything that Erasure has done so far. I think the other records are basically, we're in your face and you're going to like us immediately. We're appealing to your immediate instincts. And this is one that's like, you're really going to like this eventually. And there's a lot of value to this, but we're going to make you work to understand it a little bit so you fully appreciate it.
Yeah.
And isn't that interesting? Because that was basically the concept under which the album was made, right? This was a challenge to him to use all the analog synths and to not use any chords. Now, I suppose the analog synth part wasn't too hard because that's his comfort zone, but to stick to those rules, I know for a fact it wasn't easy. There's one quote I have from him later on where he talks about that. But yeah, the end result is something that is very cohesive and it tells a certain kind of story.
Definitely. In the early 90s, there was a brief period of time where I tried to embrace bands kind of like the Lightning Seeds and Erasure Chorus. Do you remember them?
Oh, yeah. I loved Erasure Chorus.
And in the early 90s, when I was working at the college radio station, I somewhere picked up this term called perfect pop that I saw labeling those bands. And back then, I really thought that this was Erasure trying to fit into that genre, that mold. Like Erasure was trying to change their sound to be part of that perfect pop because this was so clean and so pristine. I'm not sure I had heard an electronic album that sounded like this up until this point. Listening to this now, as we're getting ready to do it, this sounds remarkably different than any Erasure album that has come before it. It just sounds so grown up.
Which I think is one of its merits, really. I think that's what makes it stand out. Even now, looking back over all of those albums, it still stands out. Still a very strong album. But I have to disagree with you about Lightning Seeds and Frasier Chorus because I can't see any sonic connections with either of those because Frasier Chorus was very light and fluffy and whispered vocals and the Lightning Seeds are almost semi-acoustic. There's guitars in there, for heaven's sake. So they're very different. But the phrase perfect pop certainly would sum them up. But pop music's such a broad church anyway, isn't it?
Right. Waiting for the Day in particular is the song that made me think of that comparison at the time. So what's your review, my friend?
Oh, this is diminishing returns, because yours, Brian, was kind of 10 out of 10, wasn't it? Sarah's was 5 out of 10?
That's right.
Oh, well, buckle up for this one. Mine's from Select magazine, which was like a grown-up smash hits really back in the day. And I think even some of the journalists from Smash Hits had decamped to Select magazine. And this review is by Sylvia Patterson, who definitely worked at Smash Hits. So I'll just read it as it is and we'll talk about it afterward. Andy Bell and his cardboard pal return with a somewhat downbeat affair in which their technopop frenzies of yore give way to an easier pace. It could just be that they've gone all serious on us, or it could be that they're finally running out of steam. Chorus is about as glorious as it gets on the dance floor front, and much of it is more Depeche Mode than even Depeche Mode are these days. Waiting for the Day, Joan, and Breath of Life all fall into a sort of giant oneness of keyboard plonkery, and Andy sounds well mournful, even in the face of the space oddity noises that they've rediscovered of late. Am I Right is a sparse contemplation on love's total uselessness, and as ever, there's plenty of flowers in the water and the like to ponder. Just when the whole thing is reaching Smith's album misery proportions, Erasure come on all London boys with I Love to Hate You, which retreads ground covered by the Pet Shop Boys on It's a Sin. Heavy keyboard bass, scale practice, sees out turns the love to anger, and then it's back to breathy angst with siren song, a poem set to technotronic jingles with operatic backing vocals for maximum emotional effect. Perfect Stranger goes overboard on the interesting buttons one can push on one's synth these days, as does the wistfully glum Home. A lot of people like Erasure because they don't try too hard. They refuse to do anything remotely diverse with their albeit rather winning blend of keyboard trickery. On the evidence of this unremarkable LP, they should try a little harder. 2 out of 5, which is just shocking.
Wow.
And I disagree with almost everything that's said really there. I mentioned before that some of these songs are in my top 10. Home is one of those tracks. I think it's such a beautiful song. Just, yeah, everything about this is just negative and sneering and very, very unsmash hits.
Yeah, to this day, Home is in my top 10 Erasure tracks. I always say that's their best album closer of all time. It's also one of their best songs of all time.
And also, I don't understand how she sees a similarity in theme or lyrical theme with It's a Sin by the Pet Shop Boys for I Love to Hate You. What?
Yeah, I was baffled by that as well.
I mean, the only two things I can think of that are similar is that it's like a faster dance type song and then it's in a minor key. That's it. That's all that they've got similarities wise.
It's interesting to me that the only review out of our three that really is enthusiastic about this is one written decades later, because that sort of, like I said, mirrors my thought processes with this.
Yes.
At the time, I would have been, like I said, 5 out of 10 with Sarah's, but I grew as a person and became much more wise.
I thought it was interesting what she said about Am I Right, which was that it's a sparse contemplation on love's total uselessness. And as ever, there's plenty of flowers in the water and the like to ponder. Because I believe that particular track, which we'll probably talk about when we go into the songs themselves, was that they were very much influenced by ABBA's The Day Before You Came, weren't they? Which is another sort of song that you could say is about love's total uselessness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a downer.
So let's touch on our personal history with the record and then jump into our track by track. Okay, so my personal history, I was so ready for this record. I remember days before it came out playing, and I'm going to sneak into town between this class and that class to make sure I get this. I've spent the last 5 years in a state of obsession with Erasure, second only to Depeche Mode. I think this was probably in my first dozen CDs that I bought because I got a CD player And being in college, I didn't have a ton of money, so I wasn't like rebuying things at that point that I already owned. I was happy with my cassettes. So only had a few CDs. I was excited to have this digitally because I thought CDs were amazing, and I would never go back to vinyl ever again, which turns out that was wrong. But unfortunately, I didn't connect with this album like I did with the previous releases. I don't know if I could put my finger on it then, but listening to it now, I'm pretty sure my problem was I just wasn't ready for the maturity and the songwriting and the growth in the songwriting that we get on this album, because even to this day, I'm guilty of it. I love my Vince Clarke to sound like little riffs that are cute and make you tap your toe and everything. You know, we're getting songs on here that don't even have little synthesizer riffs, and the chorus is just a collection of sounds and feedback and things. So I was having some trouble with the record. Luckily, the fourth song on the album threw me a lifeline, Breath of Life, which I think is the closest on this record to anything that has come before. And I used that lifeline to pull myself to safety and to accept what I was hearing. And I already gave this away. In my notes, I cryptically say, there is also a song on this album that is so good, in all capital letters, that it's one of the best songs Erasure has ever recorded. And even when I didn't like the full album, I couldn't help but love that track. And that was Home. So at least in those early days, I had some bright spots to focus on as I grew to understand and appreciate what Erasure had created. For me, it was a very slow process of, upon first listen, I loved track 4 because it sounded like old stuff to me, sort of. I loved track 10 because it was just beautiful. And track 9, Perfect Stranger, was upbeat and fast and fun. So those were the 3 things that I liked. And then I slowly just used my appreciation of those songs to kind of start digging the other music. And it took a while, but I think everyone will be pleased with my ranking of this album when we get to the end of the podcast. So that's my history.
All right. So my personal history with this, so many of my personal histories do relate to Brian. And I was at college with him at this time when this one came out. And I think it was the next semester, the spring of 92, that I won a really nice Sony boombox.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
School with a CD player. I was like, wow, I was so excited because I didn't have a CD player. And so I remember borrowing CDs from you and played this one and Hoodoo all the time on my new boombox.
See, you associate them together too.
I do. I absolutely do. Yep. Yeah. Those two are like hand in hand for me. Same period of time. And I remember liking most of these songs pretty well at the time. I do remember not being super keen on the slower ones, especially Siren Song. But that's typical for me anyway. I mean, I'm constantly talking about how I don't really like the slow songs, especially on a group like Erasure where I'm expecting more, poppy, upbeat, bouncy tracks. But I don't remember feeling disappointed or anything like that. I thought it was a good album.
It's crazy that we both are grouping those 2 records together in our memories.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's due to the size of your CD collection at the time. And yeah.
So, Mr. Dineley?
I suppose I kind of covered it at the start of the podcast a little bit about, kind of remembering it from photographs and seeing the picture of me with the HMV bag and knowing what was inside that bag. Because at this point, in my job, I just moved into the city centre. So previously my office had been on the outskirts of town, sort of away from all of the hustle and bustle. And in 91, I was working in the town centre, very close to Virgin Records and HMV. And, I could pop out at my lunchtime and buy all of this stuff. And I just remember it very clearly, buying it and also being very excited about it because I had loved Chorus, the single. I remember buying that in all its formats. And I think I even bought the American version of it, which had even more versions and remixes of the A and the B side. I wasn't disappointed. I liked it from start to finish. I think even the slow songs I liked and still do. So it was a strong album for me then because I was very committed to the band and was very much looking forward to seeing them tour this album. That's a whole different matter, which we might get onto later. And very, very warm feelings for an album that's actually quite cold sounding. So that's my review in a nutshell.
Be sure that you eventually work your way to your comments on that tour then, because now I'm intrigued.
Well, there wasn't one, was there, basically? But
well, then wait, there's a live disc on this reissue. There's the 3rd disc is Chorus Live.
Yeah, it's what they did. It's normally when you release an album, you tour the album under the kind of brand of that album, but there wasn't a Chorus tour. There was what was it called? A phantasmagorical entertainment tour.
Oh.
And I think that part of the issue was that the ABBA-esque EP commercially eclipsed everything that had been released around this album. So, the chorus, I Love to Hate You, Am I Right, and Breath of Life singles had been successful, but they couldn't compare to what ABBA-esque became because it was so massive all around Europe. I think it was their only number one single in the UK. So it probably felt wrong to name the tour after an album that had an EP that followed it that wasn't on the album. So I think it was a bit confusing. So yeah, there wasn't a chorus tour, but there was a tour in which they played some of the songs off this album that wasn't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I knew they had a tour with that name, but I didn't know when it fell in their history. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of another case of them being too prolific for their own good in some cases. We talked about that with The Innocents and Crackers International and how those kind of stepped on each other in terms of being able to capitalize on success. I think that happened here too, in a way.
Right. Yeah, they would have. Phantom Bride would have been a single if not for Crackers International.
Right.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
All right. So we are up to our track by track.
Well, I don't know about that, Brian.
Are you putting the stops to it for now?
Yeah. I'm going to say let's quit for now, right?
All right. Yeah, we will pick up next time with the full discussion on side one.
Okay.
And that'll be a good length for an episode. This was a good length for an episode.
Yeah, I think so. Nice chunk of listening pleasure, I hope, for everybody.
You know what I took great pleasure from in listening to that episode?
I don't know.
I love the point in the discussion where Andrew talks about Yazoo and then sort of like, I think he feels because he's talking to us from the U.S., he shouldn't have said that. So he backtracks one sentence and restates that sentence, but calls them Yaz. So I like that he corrects himself, quote, corrects himself.
For
because
his silly American friends, yeah. Aw, that's very sweet.
So thanks again to Andrew. He's going to be with us on all of these episodes, all 3 episodes. So that is awesome, and we appreciate his time. Don't forget, we have that giveaway.
Yes.
And don't forget that we need the person who provided the CD for the giveaway to reach out to us. Let us know that you were the person that gave us this awesome CD that we're going to be giving away.
Yeah, every time you say reach out, I keep thinking of Erasure from the Cowboy album, Reach Out and Touch Me.
I think of Reach Out and Touch Faith.
Well, that makes more sense too.
To enter that contest, just send us an email at permrecordpodcast@gmail.com. Put Erasure giveaway in the title or something. Type whatever you want in the body of the email. Just try to be polite, and we'll get you entered in the drawing.
Sounds like a plan. And at the beginning of this episode, I mentioned if you want to talk about your memories with the Erasure chorus, we would love to hear them. And we said we would give you the information on how to do that. So here that is. We've got 2 methods for voicemails. And one is the number 724-490-8324. That's a great one to use if you're located in the United States, and you can leave us a voicemail there. And if you would also like to leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/permrecordpod, that is a great way to get in touch with us all over the world. You can leave a 90-second voicemail there. If you need more than 90 seconds, hey, just record another one. We've had that happen before too. So looking forward to hearing from all of you wonderful folks out there who have great memories of this album to share with us.
Yeah, that SpeakPipe thing is not a problem. If you get cut off and you have to record a second part, we can just edit those together here, and it seems pretty seamless.
I would agree.
When you listen to it. So yeah, that's not a problem. So if you have Erasure memories, we'd love to hear those and share those on the episode. Before I forget, we've been out on social media for a long time on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Yes.
But in the past couple weeks, I've signed up for those exciting new ones, Blue Sky and Threads. And I'm doing my best. It's a lot of social media to be in charge of at once.
I know.
So I'm doing my best to share things on all 5 of those when we do share things. So if you are on either of those sites, Blue Sky or Threads, look for us there because...
Same handle as always, right? Perm Record Podcast?
Yep.
All right.
Because we need people to follow there. Right now, when I log into Blue Sky, I think I see Von Herzog and Gavin Hogg and nobody else.
Oh, gee.
So let's give me some variety, guys. I love those 2, but I need some other people to follow.
All right. That sounds good.
All right. So thanks for listening. We will be back before too long because the episode's already recorded. I just need to edit it.
Okay.
And so we'll be back before you know it with part 2 of Erasure Chorus. We're going to talk about every song on side 1. It should be good.
Yeah. Yep. Looking forward to it, and I hope you are too.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
What you hear is what you get.
Let me just get my notes up on that one.
Okay.
Done. There you go. I'm so efficient.
You are efficient. You just did that in seconds.
He opened his file in just seconds.
A click that was heard around the world.
Nice.